around my story.
Traffic is crazy. I'm checking my makeup for the millionth time using my pocket mirror because I would like my interview to go as perfect as could be. I want to impress the interviewer because Posh Magazine has always been my dream job. I applied as an intern, and I know hundreds of ladies my age would kill for the chance that I have right now. Oh, the green lights are finally on. Great. I will make it just in time. But then, a motorcycle just cut my lane. I was able to hit the brake, but I bumped my head in the steering wheel, and that's gonna leave a mark. I opened the car window so I could yell at the motorcycle guy. But just like the perfect special effects in movies, the wind blew so hard. The papers, including my resume, flew out of my car. Without second thoughts, I jumped out of the car to get the papers that were flying away. Then I absent-mindedly crossed lanes. I was almost hit by not just one but countless cars. Then my phone rang. Great! It's the interviewer trying to know where I am and if I am coming for my scheduled interview. As I took out my mobile phone from my bag to answer the call, a random guy ran over my direction and quickly snatched my phone. Instinctively, I ran towards his direction. Hey, give that back to me! I didn't care about the cost of my phone. I just care about my contacts. I'm still thinking about my interview. This is my only priority at the moment. Then just like a hero, the motorcycle guy chased the snatcher and he was able to catch him. The police were able to take care of the snatcher, then the motorcycle guy took the pleasure of giving me back my phone. Hi, Miss Beautiful. Here's your precious phone. I want to say thank you, but I'm pissed at him, so I just stormed out like a kid throwing tantrums. I just heard him yell, "You're welcome!" I went back to my car and rushed to the building where the Posh Magazine office was located. My perfect outfit is now ruined. My white dress and my shoes got dirt due to my encounter earlier. My hair in a bun got loosened up. My mascara got smudged. I'm pretty sure my lipstick is messed up as well. I would love to go to the ladies' room, but there is no time. People are staring at me, and they must think that I'm such a shameless person for applying here looking like this. I chatted with the manager, and I explained what happened to me. Nothing can stop me from being a part of this company. I told them that if it means that I have to do coffee runs and countless errands every day, it will be my pleasure to do it. They loved my spirit, and they hired me. They gave me a tour of the office. I saw where the signature clothes are kept. I also saw the studio where the photo shoots happen. Oh my god, this is like a dream. The manager asked me to take down notes because I will be the one to give the tour to visitors next time. I was hoping to meet the president of the company because I heard she's like Miranda from The Devil Wears Prada. I'm challenging myself to woo her just like what Anne Hathaway did. But I reminded myself that my life is not a movie. A perfect example would be just like what happened to me earlier. I came so prepared, but I still almost lost my chance for this job because of one unfortunate event. I parked my car in the basement of the building and I needed to rush somewhere because I have a date. I needed to change my clothes and to freshen up because I don't look exactly my best right now. Then my phone rang. It was Mark. It's our first date, and maybe he's just trying to check how I am and if the interview went well. But then I got sad when he said that he needed to cancel our date because he has some kind of work emergency. I had no choice but to put on a smile and pretend it was alright. No, it's fine, don't worry about me. Next time, maybe. I just went out of the building and went to the nearby coffee shop. I treated myself because I deserve a me time with a nice cup of coffee. It is the last day where I could have the luxury of time. Just a couple of minutes after settling in, my phone rang. I answered it immediately. It's the manager. Hello? She asked if I'm still nearby because they would need me to start today. They're asking me to get the measurements of a certain male model that will do a photo shoot the day after tomorrow. I asked the barista to make my cup to go because it would be such a shame to waste a much needed cup of coffee. I rushed to the office and I was there in no time. I started immediately and acted like a pro. I did not let the manager notice that I have zero idea of what I'm doing. I don't know how to measure a body, but I checked a few videos online. Good thing I'm a quick learner. There are lots of guys in the room, and it's like raining muscles in here. This must be heaven for most girls. Well, I do enjoy the view, but I constantly reminded myself that I'm here to work and I will not do anything to ruin this opportunity, so I needed to focus. I was able to get the measurements of the male models. It was not that hard, and I really got to enjoy brushing my skin to their biceps. Okay, Kulina, focus. The manager entered the room and asked if I was done. I gave her the list of measurements and I saw in her eyes that she was impressed. But when I asked her for my next task, she said, "Dear, you're not done yet." I'm confused. Mr. Pierre is arriving soon. He's the most popular ramp model in the industry. And my heart just pounded. I got so excited. I will have the honor of being the one to get the measurements of the male supermodel of the company, and I think that is such a big deal. Oh, there he is. When I saw him, my jaw dropped. He was the motorcycle guy. He greeted the manager and vice versa, and then he greeted me. Hey, it's you. The manager asked if we knew each other. Before I could answer, he saved me the trouble. He told her what happened earlier, and she complimented him for what he has done. "You're such a hero." The manager left us alone, so I already took his measurements, which lasted for less than 10 minutes. I couldn't help but notice that he's got this wicked grin on his face the whole time. I just smirked at him. "Is that really how you'd like to thank me? By frowning at me?" I forced a smile, and I know I looked silly. "Hey, if you cannot say thank you, just be nice," he said. I walked away from him because, to be honest, I don't know how to deal with him. I am pissed at him because I almost didn't make it. But what are the chances that my first assignment will involve him? Odd, I know. If you would not stop walking away, I will tell the manager that you're rude to me. No more second thoughts. I stopped walking. I felt like he was walking near my direction. He talked to me. "Are you really not gonna thank me?" "Is that what you want? Then thanks," I said sarcastically. "Come on, you need to make it up to me, or else I'll tell your manager." I cut him off before he could say anything else. "Enough, what do you want?" He just laughed at me, then said, "I want you to have a cup of coffee with me." No thanks. I raised my cup and said, "See, I'm having one right now." He conceded and asked me for dinner instead. I know he's the type of guy who will not stop unless he gets what he wants, which is time to spend with me. I went home, took a bath, dressed up, put on light makeup. I don't want to be overdressed. He might think that I'm making too much effort for him. He picked me up at exactly 7 p.m., and we had dinner at a nice steakhouse. Well, he seemed different than our first encounter. He's actually a gentleman. A lot of people are staring at us because maybe my date looks so good. I feel so ordinary beside him. "You look wonderful," he said. I just smiled because I felt like he was sincere about it. After the main course, he ordered some wine and we talked all night about our lives. His name is Elia Pierre. I've learned that he's been a model since he was 18. He is 22 now. I'm 21. Not bad. I suddenly forgot about my frustrations with Mark. Good thing he's not my boyfriend yet. I realized that I have so many options, especially now that I'm working at Posh Magazine. How lucky am I that I got to date a model on my first day of work? I know this guy likes me. I can feel it. But I need to be careful because I don't want to get my heart broken. What if he's just bored and he's just collecting a jar of hearts? Anyway, I told him that this date is just a one-time thing and that he should just consider it as my way of saying thank you. But then as time passed, we spent a lot of moments together, especially during fashion shows when I assisted the models backstage. We always spent time together by having coffee or eating out after each event. But I told him that I can only promise friendship, nothing more, nothing less. He said that he's good with it as long as he can have me near him. One random moment, I asked him if he already met the president of the company. He did not answer right away. Yeah, I know her. She's a nice person. Really? That's not what I heard. He just laughed at me, but we instantly dropped the topic. Then that day came. I met the president and I don't know, but she looks really familiar to me. A lot of people say we look exactly the same. I disagree because she's so beautiful. She doesn't look like she's almost 40. I wonder if she has kids because her waist is so tiny. She looks just like my age. While I was doing some paperwork, the manager called me and asked me to join them for the meeting regarding the Fashion Week in Paris. Okay, maybe they need someone to do the minutes. In the meeting, everybody is talking about their passports. I was asked, "Do you have a passport? We're going to Paris." Paris? What now? Wow, is this serious? I'm going to Paris with them? But is Elia one of the models who will come along? During the flight, I'm thinking if Elia would also be there. He mentioned he's been to Paris before, so I would ask him to give me a tour. I was on the same flight with the manager and the president. The president surprisingly asked me to be her personal assistant for the event, which made others raise their eyebrows. This beautiful lady made me schedule a spa day and she asked me to join her. While we were having tea, she asked me about my family. I told her that my parents died in a plane crash. I also told her that I never had a good relationship with my mother because all my life I felt like she didn't like me. She never even said that she loves me. Yup, not even once. "I'm so sorry, dear," she said. What she told me next was a complete surprise. "I'm going to tell you a secret because I know I could trust you." I waited for her next words. "I have a daughter. I had her when I was 18. I think she might be your age by now. That is why I have a good feeling about you. If she's alive and well, I hope she grew up to be as pretty and smart as you are." I got water in my eyes. I never heard those words from my mom. The president and I dressed up after a hot steam session and she asked me if I would love to go shopping with her. Who would say no to that? She bought me a lot of shoes and bags. She asked me to change my clothes into signature ones. We rented a car and strolled around the city. It was so much fun. How I wish I had a moment like this with my own mother. I cannot wait to talk to Elia about this. He might not believe the moment I'm having right now with the lady. We finally reached the hotel and we went straight to our rooms. "See you later," she said. I received Elias' text message. He said that he's not included on the list of the male models that are in Paris, and he also said that he would tell me something important when I arrived back home. And he sounded so serious and strange. Then I noticed that I still have the lady president's purse with me. I offered to hold it so she could enjoy her shopping. I was on my way to the room when I saw Elia. I thought he was not in Paris. I almost called out his name, but I decided to stay quiet and just spied on him. I followed him to check where he was going. Why is he hiding from me? If he is here with another woman, then why is he keeping it a secret from me? I knew it. He's just making me a fool. But then again, why am I jealous? I'm the one who only wants friendship. I followed him still. I hid at the corner to check which room he was going to enter. And boy was I shocked. He entered the room where the lady president was. Are they having an affair? But I heard the lady is not married, so it's not exactly an affair. Also, Elia is technically single. I'm the one who said we're just friends. So why am I acting like a girlfriend that's been cheated on? I'm torn if I have to return the purse right now. But I heard her phone ringing from her purse, so I had no choice but to knock on her door and return the purse. She opened the door, and I heard someone taking a shower. It is confirmed. I am heartbroken. I don't know what came to me. Back to my hotel room, I drafted my resignation letter right away. Then I flew back home using my own money for the ticket. I couldn't stand being there for another day. I know I wasted a good chance, but I need to pull myself together. How can fate be so cruel to me? Is that the universe telling me to realize that I have fallen for Elia? But I guess it's too late. I never should have entertained him in the first place. A few days have passed by. I cried my eyes out and I ate ice cream at my apartment. I live alone, so I'm free to do whatever in my own space. Then one night, the doorbell rang. I thought it was the pizza guy, but I was surprised to see the lady president. I'm hesitant to let her in because my place is such a mess, but she insisted. When she got inside, I was surprised when she gave me a hug. Then she said, "I knew it. It was you. I'm so glad I found you." Then she saw the picture of my dad placed beside a vase in the receiving area. "He's your father, right?" Yeah. "He's the love of my life," she replied. How could this be? I don't understand what's going on anymore. But she explained everything. She said that ever since she got money, she started looking for me, but luck was never on her side. She got an idea of hiring a private investigator so things would be faster. The first private investigator she hired just scammed her, so she decided to do everything on her own. She almost gave up about finding me, but then Elia came to the rescue. Elia is just working undercover as a model. He is a private investigator. He's got a strong theory that I'm the missing child of the lady president, but he doesn't have the document to prove it yet. Then she got my records from the company. He had a strong proof when he confirmed the identity of my father. He couldn't wait back home to tell the lady president, so he flew to Paris to let her know. Also, the lady president told me the story of why I grew up away from her. She explained that my father was set to marry someone else, but then they fell in love. She was just working as a secretary, so his parents were not in favor of her. She got pregnant and she hid me until I was born. One day, a group of henchmen took me away from her, and that was an order from my father's parents. She got so devastated. She went abroad to pursue her dreams in fashion and swore to get me back once she's successful. And then finally, fate was on her side. Her boss fell in love with her and financed her to have her own company. The rest is history. She hugged me again and said, "Please allow me to be a mother to you. I hope it's not too late." I hugged her back. Then she said that I should talk to Elia because he's waiting for me downstairs. Elia and I were able to patch things up. We stayed as friends because he understood that I have a lot of things to iron out. I loved spending time with my new mother because we had a lot of catching up to do. She wanted to give me a good position in the company, but I told her that I'm happy being an intern because, just like her, I want to experience learning everything from the ground up. I'm sure you'd love to hear more about what happened between me and Elia. And my story is not over yet. That was only the beginning. Hello, my name is Kate. Now I'm going to say this. I am by no means a saint, and the only reason I brought this up is later in the story. So, I dated this guy in high school for 2 years. He was the love of my life, and I planned on marrying him. His dad became super controlling, and eventually he forced us to break up. He immediately got into a relationship with another girl, and I moved on. Later on, I met this guy who we will call Max, and he was a mix between country and scene. He liked artists like Lil Peep and also was in love with horses. He had a girlfriend who lived across the country, but we stayed friends. They eventually broke up, and naturally, we both grew closer. Dear God, I regret ever saying yes to going out with him. The first 2 months, they were constant fighting. He wanted us to visit his ex girlfriend because she was failing college and addicted to coke while we were together. He would sometimes text her while he was at my house or while we were at dinner, but eventually he quit. The next few months were okay at best. He would constantly start fights with my male friends and even assumed I was cheating on him with one friend who at the time did have a crush on me. But I'm a very loyal person who went as far as to put more of my time into hanging out with my boyfriend than my friends. Eventually, we went on a cruise and he got high with a group of girls and kissed one of them. I cut it off and went on to date others. So, he texted me 3 months after breaking up, saying he wants to talk and apologize for what he did. I was still in love with him, so I agreed and we set up a time for when he could come over. I knew instantly when he pulled into my driveway that I was going to regret ever responding. There was no hug, no I miss you, none of that. Instead, he walks up to me, looks me in the eye, and says, I want to get this out of the way. I've dated a lot of people since we broke up. Yeah, nothing wrong with that. I mean, I did the same when we broke up. So I kind of agreed to being just friends and never go back to talking about getting back together for now. But then comes the bullshit. He calls me one night and says, Hey, I want to get back with you. Because honestly, wandering around is boring, and I don't want to jump into things instantly. And I was wondering if dating without labels would be okay with you. When I asked him to elaborate, he replied, as in, I can still go to dinner with other girls, you can go to dinner with other guys, and we'll see what happens. Needless to say, I hung up without saying a word. Told him thanks, but no thanks. You are not who you used to be, and I'm not interested anymore. Bonus chapter. He stopped a few weeks, but he would periodically send me pictures of him at parties or on dates with other girls or pictures of his private areas. Anyways, ever since he has been blocked on everything, but I just thought I would share this with you. This is a shout out to every girl out there. Please find someone that's worth your love and affection, not someone who wants to play with it. I have drank and I've used drugs, but I've never suffered from withdrawals. I've never chosen drugs or alcohol over my loved ones. And I have never stolen anything in order to score. I'm not an addict, but I love one. And sometimes that's an addiction. Like so many other teens and young adults, I experimented with my fair share of recreational drugs and alcohol in high school. So when my younger sister started doing the same thing when she was 14, I wrote off her new habits as reckless, youthful behavior. She would grow out of this phase eventually, I thought, just like I did. But instead of getting bored with the lifestyle and moving on, she craved more of it. And by the time she was 19, the party drugs she was using were not even enough for her. And that's when she found heroin. One of the first things that gave away her addiction was her eyes, usually big and blue and full of light. They became dark and dodgy orbs that could never quite focus, never look you back, never hold your gaze. The look I had once found in them was long gone, and I felt uneasy whenever our eyes met, which, as she began to use more, became less and less frequent. As drugs became a bigger part of her life, Everything else became smaller, even me. The days of us driving around our small town in my car, smoking a ball and blasting Sublime, were replaced with quick visits to her darkened bedroom, a space that I had left her in after I went off to college, which had transformed from a teenage safe haven into a dark cave filled with cigarette smoke, empty booze bottles, and stash boxes of every kind of opiate you could imagine, including heroin, oxycodone, and opium. The evidence was right in front of me, but sometimes it's easier to ignore the obvious than it is to embrace the uncomfortable. When we went out, which was rare because it was nearly impossible to get my sister away from the comfort cave she had built for herself, I wrote off her frequent visits to the bathroom and lack of appetite as stomach problems or even body issues. When she didn't laugh at our favorite comedy sketches, I told myself that maybe she'd just seen it too many times for it to be funny anymore. When she stayed up until 4 a.m. in the morning and slept until 3 p.m., and when she started wearing long clothes in 90-degree weather, when she couldn't hold a job, when she got her hands on money she couldn't explain, and when I actually found her stash in her purse when I was snooping one day, I just kept telling myself, she's young, she's rebelling, she'll move past this phase. I was 24 and living in Brooklyn when my 21-year-old sister called me and admitted it. Plainly and almost optimistically, she was an addict. I think you already know this, she said, voice shaky and a little too loud. But I have a drug problem. Her confession gave me no choice but to admit it too. And suddenly, my entire world had changed. The lying, the stealing, the cheating, the messy parts of an addict's life don't really change from one user to the next. They're just as dark, just as sad, and just as unforgivable as you would imagine they would be. And they're not worth the reliving and writing because I relive them every day in my own mind. Loving a drug addict is all consuming and inescapable. It's on your mind all the time. You become a husk of a human whose insides have been entirely replaced by anger, fear, and resentment, and suddenly those feelings start to bubble over into every part of your life. The little voices in your head start to tell you to be suspicious of everyone in your life. Because if this one person could betray you, if your loved one could steal from you, if your own little sister could stare you straight in the eyes and swear up and down they haven't used, when you know damn well they're hiding the drugs in their bra, then who can you trust? Your constant suspicion makes you angry too. Angry at your loved one for getting addicted in the first place. Furious at the family who sat back and watched it happen. And bitter with the entire world for allowing a problem like this to exist. But it's the guilt that hurts me most of all. Because I have taken her addiction and made it my own. Because of the darkest question in my mind isn't about whether or not my sister will live to her 25th birthday, but rather how I could have prevented it all by her 15th birthday. We grew up in a small town, and my sister and I, we were 3 years apart, were close in as preteens and as teens. We did all the normal things sisters do together, shopping, movie nights, annoying our mother. But we also did the normal things bored kids from a small town do together. And that included drinking, drugs, and partying. By the time I was a senior in high school and she was a freshman, we skipped out on the first period of school in favor of a ball cruise and a late breakfast at the diner in the next town over. When I went off to college, I didn't leave my sister at home to die of boredom. Instead, I frequently had her come visit me, and we would attend frat parties, go to raves, and stay up all night drinking, smoking, and doing whatever drug of choice. Weed, molly, ecstasy, and poppers of every variety was being passed around that night. When I would return home for visits, I made sure I always came packing weed for out west. A 30 rack of beer from the liquor store, and a small bag of the latest pill or powder to make the rounds at campus. And it didn't stop after college either. When I moved to New York for my first post-grad job, my sister came out to spend the Thanksgiving holiday with me. And instead of watching the Macy's Day Parade like we did when we were kids, we tripped on synthetic acid and made weed cookies. Even though I've traded in my own days of hard partying for a life of Friday nights spent curled up on the couch with a glass of glass, it's hard not to wonder if my influence on my sister's life led her down this dark and unending spiral of addiction. How could I have let something this awful happen to someone I love? And what role did I play in causing this? Those constant feelings of guilt are as consuming as heroin itself. Loving an addict is like being a user yourself, only instead of injecting your body with the pills and powders and alcohol, you soak your entire life in remorse and self condemnation. You convince yourself that you caused the problem and not the addict, that you're somehow in the way of the solution, not the addiction. It's selfish and self absorbed to assume you have so much power over someone else's life and something as strong as drug addiction. But when you love someone who is struggling, you just want to take everything difficult away from them, including the responsibility. And I find comfort in my guilt because I feel like as long as I own it and claim responsibility for it, I can own my sister's addiction too. If I own it, then I can control it. And if I can control it, then I can solve it. If I can solve it, then I can make sure it never happens again. But my safety blanket of guilt is more than just a desperate grasp at control. It's an addiction that feeds my soul in a vital and necessary way. A direct connection to a sister I'm constantly worried about losing. If my addiction is alive, if my guilt survives in a way, my sister will always survive too. They teach you in support groups not to blame yourself, not to hold yourself accountable for someone else's choices. But for me, letting go of that guilt is an impossible task. In my head, I know my sister's addiction is not my fault. I know I did not create my sister's addiction, but deep in the pit of my stomach, I feel these things. And unless you're the loved one of an addict, it's impossible to understand the need for both of those irrational beliefs to be true. I want to be the one in charge of my sister's addiction, because that means I have control over it. And that means I can make it go away just like I made it happen. But that's not how addiction works. No amount of wishing or hoping or praying or even loving can make it go away. We think of love as this powerful force in our lives, something that comforts us and keeps us safe and warm. But I have seen its ugly head. I've seen how destructive it can be, how painful it can feel, and how deceptive it really is. What I thought could be an all powerful weapon capable of cutting through even the thickest chains of addiction actually became a heavy set of shackles. But I began to cling to that love anyway, because I believed that if I just loved my sister hard enough, I could make her problems go away. My sister doesn't live with my family anymore. After getting clean, falling off the wagon, and repeating the cycle a few times, she decided that the best thing for her was to get on a plane and fly halfway around the world to Abu Dhabi, where she lives in a mostly drug-free country teaching preschool. She needed time and space to get away from her addiction. But no matter where in the world she runs to, my addiction to her won't be far behind. My sister has her own demons to fight, her own addictions that she will struggle with her whole life. But so do I. I'm addicted to fixing her, addicted to keeping her safe. And it's hard to see where one of our addictions starts and the other one ends. I don't know if my sister has kicked her heroin addiction for now, or if she's kicked it for good. But I don't know if I will ever be able to stop worrying about it. However, there's one thing that I know. I love my sister, and that's a habit I will never be able to kick. Don't we all feel special sometimes? I grew up in an orphan house. I'm not trying to pretend that there was anything special about it, but I grew up with this nagging voice inside my head telling me how special I am and that my life will eventually turn upside down. It turned out I was not being delusional or anything. What happened to me was every foster child's dream. If only I knew what my future held for me. My mom, dad, and twin sister committed suicide in 1992. I was saved by my extended family only to get abandoned later. I was disowned not because two of the wealthiest families in the city couldn't raise me, but because I was a curse for their reputation. My mom and dad were not married, and that brought them so much shame until they took their own lives. Fast forward few months later, one day I woke up at a children's home. I'm an orphan now. I have absolutely no memories of my parents or even my twin sister, but I do remember my extended family very well. They gave me up when I was 6 years old. My uncle is an extremely rich businessman. He was never really bad to me. In fact, he put me in what you can call a fancy home. Although he promised to visit me every weekend, he never did. I was put in a medium-sized room with four other girls, Rosaline, Claire, Bella, and me, Rachel. They were all dressed in clean nightgowns, but they were all the same color, pale green. Mrs. Milton, our guardian, gave me a similar gown to put on. It felt as if I was admitted into kids' military. Our hair was always put up in a tight bun. We all looked the same. Mrs. Milton was not the kindest person you could come across, but she wasn't evil either. The house was divided into two sections, one for the boys and one for the girls. The only time we met the boys was in the outside building, which was some sort of a school. We took a few classes every day, and to be honest, we had some really good teachers. I always sat next to a boy called Nate. I thought he was super smart, and he always helped with my math homework because numbers were never really my field of expertise. We eventually became really good friends. Whenever I went back to the room, all the girls were too occupied with their toys, and they were all good friends already. It felt like I was an outsider. However, a few months later, I became the alpha of the group. Don't get me wrong, this is not another Oliver Twist story. We used to pull pranks on each other all the time, and we had a really good laugh. I mean, being in a foster home is not exactly a vacation, so we made the best out of a bad situation. When the girls would go to sleep at night, I would go fake sleeping until Mrs. Milton had gone to sleep as well. Then I would stare out that tiny, teeny window and start counting the stars one by one. I named one after my dad, one after my mom, one after my twin sister, and finally, one after Nate. I would stay up all night long daydreaming until I fell asleep. Mrs. Milton would wake us up around 6 a.m. to have breakfast and go to class. It went on like that for years and years. Every day seemed exactly like the other, except on the weekends, which wasn't really much of a weekend. It only meant we were allowed to eat dessert. I have always been an extremely curious little girl, and the reason Nate and I grew so close was because he was a curious boy as well. We had no idea about the outside world.
We had so many unanswered questions, and sometimes we would make up answers to tame our brains. The girls had relatives visiting them during the weekend, but I would stay in my room. Sometimes I cried, and sometimes I shut my eyes close and tried to imagine what my mom looked like. One day during science class, Nate asked me who visits me on the weekend. I never said anything back. I pretended that I didn't even hear him. But in a moment of extreme confusion and sadness, I wrote something down on a piece of paper and passed it to him. It said, "Let's get out of here." We were 12 years old at the time. I didn't care about the consequences at all. All I cared about was getting outside of here and exploring what was happening in the outside world. I wanted to go back to my uncle, even if he didn't want me. Nate looked at the paper, folded it into half, and he freaking swallowed the paper, and he just nodded his head at me. I wasn't sure what he meant by the nod until at midnight. While I was looking at the stars I befriended for years now, I heard the slip of a paper under the door. I quickly got up and the paper said, "Meet me at the school building in 5 minutes." I slowly opened the door and ran downstairs. Nate and I stood there awkwardly, not knowing what to do. We started discussing a runaway plan. But seriously though, what could two kids do to escape a fully guarded huge building? We were smarter than any of you would think. For the next week, we studied every movement happening around the place. When security guards changed their shifts, which teachers left class early, we even memorized the times when Mrs. Milton had to use the bathroom. We had a solid plan. At the end of the week, on Friday, we had history class, and the teacher always left a few minutes early. At the same exact time, security guards changed their shifts, and Mrs. Milton took about 3 to 4 minutes to come downstairs and walk us back to our rooms. That was it. That was the moment I have been looking for all along. We passed by the guard's back and we ran and ran like there was no tomorrow. After a few blocks, we were out of breath. We were two kids dressed exactly alike with no money and no place to go. But we couldn't stop, not after we finally did it. We kept on walking and walking until it was night. I looked up at the sky and I could not believe my eyes. The sky had endless stars. I let my hair down and got rid of that stupid bun I've had for years. I decided that Nate and I could go into a shop and ask for a suitable job that could offer us a place to live and food. Yes, I was that smart, and I still am. So we went into a grocery store owned by an old lady. We told her our story, and what she said back was, "I need to call the police." And so we begged and cried and begged, and the lady had a big heart. She offered us some sandwiches and said we could help deliver groceries around the block. We immediately agreed. Nate and I had to sleep on a blanket inside the store every night. It was not a great situation, but we loved that sense of freedom. We felt like we were hero kids with superpowers. We stayed with the old lady for what seemed like a year. If you haven't guessed it by now, I was in love with Nate. I had our wedding planned inside my head, and although he never said anything back, I knew he loved me even more. One day we heard that old lady talking to an officer who was looking for two lost kids. We grabbed all the cash we could and ran through the back door. I know it's inconsiderate to rob the woman who provided for us, but there was no other way. We quickly stopped the cab and asked the driver to drive as far as possible. He gave us a weird look, but when we showed him the money, he started driving. At this point, Nate held my hand for the first time ever, and he said, "We'll be okay." I felt my heart melt to the ground, but traffic noise brought me back to my senses. The cab driver was driving funny, but none of us was really familiar with driving, so we never really paid much attention. I looked at Nate and he said, "We need to find my uncle. He's rich, he can help." You can hide in my room. Or he can even adopt us, I don't know. My voice was shaky. Nate replied and said, "Hey, calm down. I promise we're going to be fine. Rachel, we have each other. This is all that matters. And I will help you find your uncle." I didn't hear the rest of his words. I woke up in a hospital bed. I screamed at the top of my lungs. A nurse came in and I said, "Who are you? Why am I here? I need to leave right now. Where's Nate?" The nurse gave me a pill and some water. She said, "Calm down. You'll be fine. Your friend is fine. You got into a car accident. What's your name?" I pushed her hand away and refused to take the pill. "My name is Rachel and I need to see my friend right now." The nurse just left me. Then an officer came in. He started asking questions and I kept asking to see Nate. I never answered any of his questions. I asked him to call the nurse again and she came back. I asked her to help me sit straight because I could barely feel my legs. Maybe I'd been sleeping for too long, I don't know. She just stood there. I looked down and I didn't have legs. What happened?" I asked. "The accident happened, Rachel," the nurse replied. "Now I'm a crippled orphan?" No, that couldn't be true. I'm not sure why, but I was super calm. And I asked, "What happened to my friend?" "He is okay. Where are your parents?" I stared up at the white ceiling and never said anything back. I don't know how, but it was suddenly next day morning and the officer woke me up. I told him the whole story and I described my uncle and his business name. I needed all the help I could get, but no one was telling me anything about Nate. The doctor explained that I will be able to walk again, but it might take up to a few years. Later that day, my uncle came. I had an ocean of mixed feelings, but my eyes were stoned. I couldn't shed a single tear. The first thing he said was, "Why did you do that to yourself, honey?" He dared to call me honey and to blame me for his own doing. I half smiled and said, "The doctor said I'll walk again. Have you heard anything about my friend?" He told me that Nate had a brain concussion and he's in a coma. And that was when my stone eyes melted. I felt guilty. It was me who made him run away. If it wasn't for me, maybe he would have been fine now. "Uncle Todd, could you please call in the doctor for me?" I asked. The doctor was very understanding. Although he did not have a full picture of what was going on, he explained to me that Nate will be fine, and I believed him. My uncle paid for my surgery and for Nate's stay as well. How confusing. If he had such a big heart, why did he admit me to a foster home? I lost count of the days. I wished I was back at the orphanage sitting next to Nate while he helped me with my homework. A month passed by, and Nate was doing a lot better. I saw him a few times, and I was able to walk a few steps with the help from the nurses. My uncle visited from time to time, and I could tell he was trying to make it up to me. But wasn't that just a bit too late? 6 months later, we were both sent back to the orphanage with reports that Nate is at a risk of a brain stroke, and that I couldn't walk or stand for too long. My uncle offered that we stayed at his house, but we both knew he never meant it. Back at the orphanage, we were treated differently. It wasn't just the same. Things have changed. Mrs. Milton had quit. The new guardian was called Mrs. Buffy, like the one from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Let me tell you that that woman was not kind. During break time, Nate and I would discuss what we wanted to pursue as careers, because we only had a few years left here, and then we could just leave without having to run away. Nate wanted to become a programmer. The guy was a true genius. and I wasn't so sure of what I wanted. But if you guys still remember the beginning of my story, I knew I was destined for something special. Mrs. Buffy caught us exchanging love letters, and Nate and I were forbidden from sitting next to each other in class. Well, except during history class, because the teacher didn't really care much about anything. We were also expert sneakers by now, so we managed to steal a kiss every now and then. Things were starting to get better. I could walk better, and Nate could talk better, because he had a problem with stuttering. A year passed by, and we were about to leave the orphanage and go to college in less than 6 months. One day during break, Nate started throwing up. Mrs. Buffy refused to even call a doctor. The next morning, he couldn't speak at all in class, and he started throwing up again and again. I ran up to Mrs. Buffy to take him to the hospital, and she replied, "We can't afford hospital, Rachel," and looked the other way. "Call my uncle right now," I screamed at her. "Fine," she said in a very careless voice. My uncle came, and Mrs. freaking Buffy refused that I go with them. And so my uncle took Nate to the hospital. After 4 hours, my uncle came back, and without my consent, he demanded I leave and go home with him. I was so concerned and just went with him. I kept on asking questions, and he said nothing back. He parked in front of his mansion, and he said, "They tried their best at the hospital. I'm so sorry." And he hugged me for the first time ever. I pushed him back, and he said, "What does that mean? Do you mean that Nate is gone?" And then my uncle started crying. He invited me to go inside, but I refused. No, no way. Nate couldn't just leave me like that. I walked away. I sat on the pavement recalling all the memories we had together. I looked at my artificial legs and kicked them so hard, but I didn't feel a thing. I lived with my uncle for a year, on the condition that I will pay rent until I could move out. What if Mrs. freaking Buffy had called the doctor? Wouldn't Nate be here right now? I had nightmares about killing her every single night. I got a part-time job as a teacher. I paid my rent and saved the rest for college. I finally knew what I wanted to study. I wanted to study journalism. I worked day and night until I could afford college. I sent hate letters to Miss Buffy every now and then. As soon as I graduated, I landed a 1 in a million job. I worked for the biggest newspaper in town. I moved out from my uncle's, but we are on good terms. 2 years later, I went back to the orphanage, only to find out that another kid had died due to lack of responsibility. Although Mrs. Buffy was old and even grumpier now, it didn't stop me from getting back at her. I wrote every detail of Nate's story and submitted it to my boss. He never even knew I grew up in an orphanage. The story went viral. I was even interviewed to share more details on television. Finally, Mrs. Buffy went to prison after a long trial. Oh, I could almost hear Nate smile in heaven right now. I may not have legs, and I may get bullied every now and then, but I have Nate living inside my heart. After things went viral on social media, I was able to get enough donations to open my own foster home in Nate's name, and to forever honor his name. See, I told you, I was destined for something extra special.
Hello, my name is Brenda, and this is how I embarrassed myself when I was about 14 years old. Before I tell you my story, let me highlight a few points. All teens experience some amount of anxiety at times. It is actually a normal reaction to stress, and sometimes it even helps them deal with overwhelming situations. For many teens, things like public speaking, final exams, or even going out on a date can cause feelings of anxiety. For some teens, however, anxiety can go beyond these typical symptoms to negatively affect friendships, participation in activities, and even their schoolwork. And do not get me started on how being a teenager is made of the devil's blood. Okay, that was an innocent joke, but I do mean it. So, back to our story. I was sitting in class behind the cutest guy in my grade. His name was Josh, and I just wanted to ask for his phone number, but I was painfully shy and terribly afraid of being rejected. But it was almost time for the school dance. I wanted to go with him, but there was no way on earth I could have done it face to face. I tried to talk myself through the anxiety and convinced myself to actually go through with it. I debated with myself for a while, missing most of that day's in class instructions before I finally decided to ask him. And I did. I did ask Josh for his number, and he agreed. He slowly took my phone, typed in his number, and handed it back to me. I felt relieved. I had finally gotten the number. I mean, I was wrong. There was nothing to be anxious about. I had made it much worse in my mind than it actually was. It was actually nice to realize I was anxious over nothing, to be over it and have his number. I got home later that day and I was so excited to call or text Josh. But because I'm socially awkward, I decided to try and text him. But the message didn't deliver. I checked the number he gave me and noticed that it included the digits 911, which indicated to me that he had given me a fake number. Maybe he was trying to avoid me. I suddenly became aware of how weird I had acted towards him. I didn't have much of a relationship with the guy before asking for his number. There was no rapport between us, so it came across as creepy when I asked him. I also asked him in the middle of class by tapping him on the shoulder. There was nothing smooth or even normal about how I went about it. I hadn't acted immoral, but it was painfully awkward, socially inappropriate, and thus doomed to fail. The encounter was painful, but from it I suppose I learned some lessons on how to appropriately socialize. I also learned that it is incredibly easy to miss obvious signs that other people are giving you when you're anxious, because you're so absorbed with yourself that you miss social cues. Looking back at how he was clearly uncomfortable with my request, which he made clear by not smiling and by hesitating in agreeing to type the number. Had I gotten out of my head and paid attention, I might have noticed how he was acting and how that clearly reflected how he felt about me and our interaction. It makes me question, is having high functioning anxiety easier than being trapped in your own shell, frozen with anxiety? It may be the lesser of two evils, but for me this experience turned into purpose, and it built my self-confidence. I see it as a step, but then improving self-esteem and self-worth will have you high-functioning without anxiety. That is the end game. But you know what? Write your own script. You can't go on if someone else is writing your script. And I know that a lot of kids at school felt the same way. They didn't feel good, and I didn't know why. Kids will relate, and this is so freaky, and it makes anxiety even worse. You have to go to know that you are okay in school, and you cannot know unless you go. Getting over anxiety is not some hippie mumbo jumbo, and it took me years to get over what I call life fright. And I learned that the very hard way. Now, does the devil joke make sense? Hello there, my name is Pearls. The first day of my professional life was the worst professional day ever. During my first year at college, I wanted to spare my parents some of the expenses. So I took a job, and it happened to be the closest thing I could get to my dream job. It was an office that was mainly concerned with planning fashion shows. I know I was only an intern at the moment, but I have never been so excited in my life. I was actually studying fashion designing, so lucky me. But since we all know that life isn't always pink and roses, I had a repulsive boss. Let's call her Jane. I was Employee of the Month 3 times in a row. My life couldn't get any better. Well, except for Jane, who always thought I made her the worst coffee ever, yet she still drinks it. The closest colleague I had at work was a guy named Mark. I also had a tiny little crush on him, but that is not our point here. Anyways, I was supposed to organize a huge event, and so Jane sent an extra long office-wide email giving out details about the event and the brand and who was assigned to do what. I was ecstatic. I was running around the office like a busy bee that had to make sure everything was in place. After a long, tiring day, I was at my desk, rereading the email she sent and enjoying a good cup of coffee. And guess what? Jane had about a gazillion typos, and to be honest, I wanted something to cool me off after doing so much. And being the smart employee that I am,